Joining me now, the amazing host of the Megyn Kelly Show. She's also a journalist. You need to catch her show on Sirius XM Triumph Channel 111 every weekday at noon Eastern. May I also recommend the YouTube? Subscribe at youtube.com/Megyn Kelly. Megyn, okay, the White House is obviously trying to do something that you and I have seen them do many, many, many times. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have Tranny Day, but also let everyone know, no, I'm not a God-hating savage. So they're trying to walk this fine line where they can do Tranny Visibility Day, but no, the president's a devout Catholic. Sorry, I'm not buying it.
No, I know, me neither. And look, they got a bunch of blowback for celebrating Trans Visibility Day on what turned out to be Easter. And people say, well, it's been on this particular date for 15 years now. It just so happens that Easter, which does move around, happened to coincide with it this year. Okay, fine. Why are we doing this? Why? Okay, 15 years ago, this is a very different thing where this is a teeny tiny community that was getting bullied in too many circles. And it was like a way of saying, we see you, okay. Now they're the bullies. Now they're taking over women's spaces and women's sports. We've medicalized this thing for young children who are having body parts chopped off. And so the more visibility this gets, never mind celebration by a White House, the more children are going to be at risk. So this is the last thing that they should be calling attention to, especially on Easter Sunday, when it's truly one of the most, arguably the most highest holy holiday within the Catholic and Christian religions. But he doesn't care. He's not actually an observant Catholic. Obviously, neither is Nancy Pelosi, despite, I'm like, she's the number one proponent of abortion in the nation. She wants to think she's still like our high priestess. We know she's not. Same for him. Every day he laments the overturning of Roe. In any event, I think that's the real problem here, is he's blindly promoting something that's going to hurt kids because he wants us to vote for him. It's completely cynical.
Megyn, for as long as I've been alive, we have wondered, at least I've wondered, and a lot of people on the right have wondered, when are these seemingly separate groups on the left going to realize they're at opposite ends, they're working towards opposite goals and attack each other, right? Why is the climate change group the same thing as the blue collar union group? These are both left-wing groups. Why is that a thing? That should not be a thing. But one thing about the Trans Visibility Day thing, the White House has a Latino page as well. And on their official English-speaking page, it was all tranny this and tranny that. On the Latino page, not one single mention of that, Megyn. A bunch of Easter stuff. Are we finally going to see left coalitions clash? Are we seeing the beginning of this?
I think we are. Look at the polls, right? Trump's doing better and better with Latinos and with Black voters as well, in particular Black men who have had it. They've had about enough of this stuff, this cultural stuff in particular. And the Latino community tends to be Christian. And the Christian values, if you're actually living them, do not support transing our children, chopping off body parts because God got it wrong on you. You're actually secretly a girl. They don't believe in that. So they're not stupid at the White House. They understood who their voting bloc was, and that's why they didn't translate it into Spanish. But good luck, because I think the Latin voters, they understand perfectly well what the White House's stance on this is. I do think they're bleeding out on the culture wars. And to me, it's interesting because they don't seem to understand that. Whenever they try to appeal to these groups, they make ads for Black people talking about how great they are on DEI and how offensive Trump's language is, right? That's not what's motivating Black voters. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about immigration, like every other voters. They don't have some secret special group of voting concerns just because they're Black. This isn't 1960s America anymore. So I really think the Biden White House is getting that piece of their messaging wrong. And we're starting to see that flank of the Democrat Party turn red bit by bit. First, Latinos, not surprised since they're mostly Christian. But the Black community, too, is largely Christian. There are a lot of Black voters. That's how George W. Bush won re-election in 2004. They played into the gay marriage threat. And a lot of Black voters were like, we're not ready for that. And it's kind of happening again without Trump having to push it very hard. It's Biden who's pushing them away.
I think they're ready. And I think what they're looking for is to particularly see what the United States might do. And they pay very close attention to the situation in the United States. And if they see us in chaos, fighting with each other, distracted, either domestically or, say, in Europe, the Middle East, well, the go signal sure looks like it's come on in that case.
I'm not gonna lie, my conspiracy-loving mind is going crazy right now. I can't wait to just have Mike yell at me for my wild theory. So you saw that earthquake in Taiwan last night, and buildings are half over. It's friggin' horrible, right? So say a prayer for those people. And then you saw the news reports that Chinese warplanes are circling, and I thought to myself, does China have an earthquake weapon? Is that a thing that they have? Did they do that to set off an invasion? And I hate the Chi-Coms, but if they did that, that's freaking cool. Hey, Mike, joining me now, Mike Benz, Executive Director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. Mike, does China have an earthquake weapon? If so, that's awesome.
Well, if they did, I feel like 60 Minutes would have already done several in-your-face specials on it. We were just told that Russian brain beams are in vogue now. Basically borrowing from the Marjorie Taylor Greene space laser. We're now into brain beams, so earthquake weapons seem like a natural evolution in our news cycle. I see the Taiwan situation as being, and I'm being slightly glib when I say this, but I see it more as being a bribery game than being a military, bloody warfare game. Our hold over Taiwan's internal politics, which is necessary for our ability to be able to import all the semiconductor chips and all the high technology that Taiwan, it makes it so geostrategically important, is dependent on our funding of Taiwan civil society and Taiwan major political players. As China's economic rise continues, they will be able to outcompete us for soft power influence on Taiwan. And a moment like this, where there's an earthquake, is really one of those moments that come around in the fate of a country and help often decide who wins the bribery game. If you remember, Haiti had a series of major earthquakes and natural disasters and floods. These were opportunities for reconstruction funds to come flooding into the country, and then suddenly major swaths of the country are now owned by those new landowners. You could have a situation like that in Taiwan now, where I'm not anticipating a military strike or threat by China, but the competition for who will provide the reconstruction funds is something that I'll be keeping an eye on.
Okay, so look, if I'm being kind, this administration is not exactly known for their deft foreign policy moves. Who exactly do we trust in the Biden administration to outnavigate Xi Jinping when he's like 5 miles off the coast of his border? I know it's further than that, but it's really close.
Yeah, well, we're probably going to have to wait about 7 months to find somebody who's got their head on straight on that issue. So I can't name anyone in particular in the Biden State Department. I mean, they are truly riding the horse backwards, at full galloping speed. So I agree with your assessment there. And this actually relates to a lot of other things that are happening right now in the news. I mean, I talk a lot, for example, about Ukraine and the role of the Biden first family in the natural gas story. Obviously, there was Burisma, but then there was also the play to privatize Naftogaz, the Ukrainian state-owned gas company. And then it surprised many folks about 6 months ago when the Biden administration announced a pause on LNG exports. Now, to me, I didn't see this as the Biden administration going after the LNG market, going after the liquefied natural gas market. What that pause does is that pauses U.S. exports abroad. But we know that Hunter Biden's private equity firm invested $1.6 billion in Sinopec, China's major gas company. Sinopec is not impacted by that LNG export. Sinopec's competitors are. And in fact, this is one of these situations where it keeps the price of gas high to pause the exports from the U.S. because the U.S., with our fracking miracles, basically become the largest natural gas exporter in the world. With those exports paused, this gives Sinopec and Chinese gas companies the ability not only to increase their market share in the international gas market, but at the same time, they get to make massive more profits because as the supply is constrained with the U.S. exports paused, that means they can draw a larger profit from a bolstered price of the gas they're producing. So it's almost like U.S. foreign policy is designed to maximize profits for China.
No, of course it is. Okay, so that actually leads me to any potential future conflict with China, Mike, whether that be on Taiwan or somewhere else. if there is an actual conflict, God forbid, between us and China, I find this to be the oddest situation historically. I'm sure there are examples, but we need each other. They need us, and we need them. Could we ever actually fight?
It would take a series of escalations, I think, with an opportunity at every point to de-escalate. And I don't think it's even gone through the first sort of iteration of escalations. Obviously, there's a lot of positioning right now in the South China Sea. China has vastly increased the size of its Navy, while the U.S. is completely stalled in that regard. But China has an advantage in that respect, because the U.S. has 750 to 800 military bases dotting the entire globe. We are a world army, whereas China is a regional army, and that allows them a tremendous concentration of power. And they are only right now in the early stages of converting their economic dominance into military potential. Obviously, the richer you are as an economy, naturally over time, the better your military becomes, because you're able to convert all of that capital into a military industry. And China has only really begun that process in the past decade. And it's one of these things where right now China is now the largest trading partner to Europe. They now have a larger gross economy than the U.S., but we still have a larger war machine. As every passing year, China gets farther and farther ahead of us economically, it's going to be more and more difficult for us to be able to challenge China militarily. And as I see it, there's not going to be any military move until there's a clear winner. When near peer equals are very close together in military strength, they very, very rarely go to war. It's usually when one party perceives they can wreck another country's military because it's wreckable. And I don't think the U.S. is yet in that state.
Pretty dangerous criminals there, right? Scary stuff. And hey, maybe you're worried about running into one of those people tonight on your way to the car to get some bonbons from the gas station. Well, don't worry. 10 of those people now face 11 years in prison for that crime right there. Joining me now, Aaron McIntyre, wonderful commentator, someone I listen to every chance I get, author of the book, The Total State, which you should pick up if you want to understand what we're looking at here. Aaron, 87-year-old survivor of a communist concentration camp, going to be thrown in prison for 11 years in the United States of America for singing praise and worship songs, and still half the Christians won't vote in this upcoming election. That's where we're at in this country.
Well, Jesse, you know well that destroying Christianity is a core goal of any communist regime, whether it be in Spain, Russia, China. They hate Christianity. They know that it serves as a moral alternative, another base that shields people from the control of the state, the mind control, the brainwashing, the forcing of alien values into places like the home and the sphere of the community. And so obviously they're going to go after these people. It's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. The people who are the foot soldiers of the regime, they can go burn down your house, they can go ahead and burn down your church, they can go ahead and burn down your business. But if you're sitting there interrupting something that is sacred to the regime, you're going to jail.
Aaron, can you explain the complacency on the right? And I'm not just talking about practicing Christians, but we right now have open religious prosecution courtesy of the DOJ, and they're doing it in response to a Supreme Court ruling they don't like. That's how incredibly corrupt and inappropriate this is. Roe versus Wade gets overturned. The DOJ declares war on pro-lifers, and the right just doesn't care that much. Why?
There's an obsession with process. The right believes in order, and rightly so, right? We want to be the side of order. We want to be the side that follows the rules. That makes perfect sense. Until you realize that the institutions dictating those rules are completely captured. Until you realize that the rules are actually set up in a way not to build up your society, not to protect what you hold as traditional or sacred, core to your identity as a people, but instead is set up to destroy those things. And so a lot of conservatives who naturally want to protect their institutions, naturally want to protect the rule of law and the order, have no idea how to react when the very institutions that are supposed to protect those things instead turn on them. So they're just sitting around saying, oh, what do we do next? What do we want to do next? Maybe we should just work the process harder. Maybe there's another way we can go ahead and follow the rules and more effectively, and then we'll have our victory. They don't understand that the entire thing has been turned on its head.
Aaron, when did it get turned on its head? I'm not old. I think I'm probably a little older than you, but I'm 42. But I've had a hard time trying to describe recently to my sons, they're 13 and 15, what America was like when I was a kid. I'm not some great grandpa. Come bounce on my knees, son, and I'll tell you about 15-cent cheeseburgers. I'm trying to explain to them what even television was like, and it's like I'm describing a totally different world.
Yeah, the key is really that it has been a slow process. It feels sudden to us now, but that's only because we have a little bit of perspective. If you look over time, you realize that the freedoms of the United States have been shifting for a long time. Most people don't talk about things like the fact that FDR stole all of the gold in the United States. We just don't talk about the fact that that happened because that would be really inconvenient to our understanding of things like the Constitution and rule of law. We don't really address the many different ways in which our government has grabbed for power for a very long time. But now that we've gotten into this radical position where it seems like anything, just a basic expression of faith or disagreement with government policy, can be used, can be weaponized by something like the DOJ to destroy your political enemies, all of a sudden it feels like the whole roof is collapsing on top of us. But actually, the frog has been boiling in the water. It just was boiling very slowly and has suddenly realized what kind of trouble it's in.
Are the American churches going to stand up and do anything about it? This is something I scream about all the time. It's essentially a standing army sitting there that could vote its way right back into complete cultural dominance if it would wake up, and they don't seem awake. What's going on?
Well, one of the core things that happened to the church is that in things like the 1980s, the moral majority campaigns ended up losing particular parts of the culture war. And the lesson that many pastors took from that was that the involvement of Christians in politics is what had made Christianity unpopular. And if only they could evolve with the times and stay away from controversy and show that they were cool and hip and with it, then they would be able to go ahead and draw people back to church. But what we found is that the more the church conforms to the world, the less it's interested in involving itself in politics or speaking into important areas. It simply becomes less relevant. It simply becomes just another social organization that people may or may not show up to, which is why many of the mainline Protestant denominations are dying off, while many of the other denominations that demand more of the people that go to their church are the ones that are flourishing. And so I think we will probably not see an overall change in the church's attitude, but we will probably see the churches that are speaking out, the churches that are taking action, the ones that are demanding more, draw people who are interested in change. And that could be a positive development, but I wouldn't expect to see all of Christianity rise up against this, unfortunately.
Aaron, you have a piece up about the danger of regime charity. What are you talking about?
So Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos from Amazon fame, of course, ended up giving a large amount of money to charity. I think it's something like $16 billion at this point. And a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, that's amazing. It's so great that she's handing out money to charity. And in her eyes, I'm sure she's trying to save the world. But in actuality, what she's doing is handing out large amounts of money to charitable organizations in theory, but in practice, they're actually organizations designed to reinforce the thought process of the regime, the morality and the norms of the regime. That money is funneled into these organizations, and they can do work that the actual government elected officials can't do. So, for instance, when the regime wants to go ahead and censor people on social media or get them fired, it would be a violation of the First Amendment, at least in theory, for them to go out and actively pursue that. But these charities can apply pressure to those different groups to try to get that censorship or that firing done under the name of being a charity. And so all of that money seems like it's going to help people, but in many cases, what it's actually doing is being donated to the total state, being donated to the powers that be and advancing the progressive worldview.
Aaron, thank you, my brother. Hey, by the way, before you go, the total state, what's it about?
Total state is a lot about what we just talked about, that expansion of government power into these places that are not traditionally thought of as political, as being part of the state, but end up consuming all of our personal spaces and driving us all towards this hyper-politicalization that distorts the Constitution.
And why isn't federal immigration law tougher on border crossers who come here and are accused of serious crimes?
So, are you speaking of a specific case?
There's this story in New York, an 8-person crew of border crossers found with drugs and guns. 6 of them now are out on bail. Does President Biden think policies like that are making the country safer?
So I want to be really careful. That's an active case, so don't want to comment on an active case. But anyone found guilty, and we've been very clear about that, anyone found guilty of a crime should be held accountable. We have been very, very clear about that.
Whenever they say they've been very clear, that's a good sign they're lying and haven't been clear about anything. Joining me now, Adam B. Coleman, author of the book Black Victim to Black Victor. Adam, they've been very clear. They've been very clear that they want the border open. What seems to confuse so many people on the right is why. Why do these people want the country flooded with illegals?
I think that's even a question I sometimes have a hard trouble answering, because sometimes I think it's malicious and sometimes I think it's just incompetence. And I often think the type of issues that we see coming from, especially Democrat leaders these days, is incompetence more so than malevolence. From the incompetence standpoint and just playing partisan politics, when Joe Biden got into office, he basically just wanted to do anything that was the opposite of what Trump did. So if Trump was strong on the border, he wanted to be weak on the border. And any type of action that Biden did that was objectively wrong and wasn't working, they defended it, just like any other politician would. So I think part of that is incompetence. Now, I do think that there is an effort to kind of keep it going by some of them. As to why, money. I think there are a lot of lobbying interests, maybe not necessarily on the national level, but on the local level. I'm near New York City, and the hotel lobby loves this. They lost a ton of money during COVID because of lack of tourism, and all of a sudden they got guaranteed money, inflated prices that they wouldn't have never made, 100% occupancy rates for some of their hotels. I mean, money is definitely a huge factor, and they're one of the strongest lobbies within the city and within the state, I should say. So, I mean, money is definitely a big part of it. There are lots of people who are making money off of this situation.
Adam, you have a great piece up in the Telegraph talking about something I've been concerned about for quite some time, our enemies exploiting the fact we have an open border. It's not just that we have an open border, it's that everybody knows it. So any Tom, Dick, and Harry coming from anywhere can come pouring across that border. We got Chinese men pouring across the border. Who knows what they're doing here? It's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's the most obvious reason why you would want to have a secure border. It's quite literally, as a child who watched, our Twin Towers go down because of terrorists coming into our country, and we're supposed to learn this hard lesson about security, right? Well, here we are saying that the border is just this invisible line, and what does that even mean anymore? We have to become the safety net for the entire world and take our eye off the ball when it comes to security. But security is a really, really big issue. There are a lot of people who do not like us. As much as there are a lot of countries that do like us and like working with us, there are a lot of countries that don't like us, and there are a lot of organizations, small terrorist organizations that do not like us. So, in that piece, I'm highlighting how there's an ISIS component when it came to the attacks in Russia. And what's there to stop them from coming after us? We are incredibly vulnerable. And in the piece, I highlight how, the FBI has talked about this. They've caught people who are on the terrorist watch list. Like, we know that there's attempts to have these types of people come in. there was a human trafficker with ISIS links that was helping to bring Uzbek migrants into our country. They know about this, right? So the intelligence agencies know that we're incredibly vulnerable. There have been attempts from people who are malicious who've entered our country. Whether they have a plan or don't have a plan, I don't know. But this is a real concern.
This is not a Baltimore catastrophe, not a Maryland catastrophe. This is a national economic catastrophe as well. As you mentioned, I mean, this port is one of the busiest and most active ports inside of the country. And so this is not just going to have an impact on Maryland. This is going to impact the farmer in Kentucky. This is going to impact the auto dealer in Ohio. This is going to impact the restaurant owner in Tennessee.
And that is exactly my concern. You shut down a major port, we all feel it, not just the people in Baltimore. Joining me now, Army and Marine veteran Jason Nelson, to expand on this a bit more and help stupid people like me understand it. Okay, Jason, why are we feeling an impact? I don't understand. I live in Houston. I ain't anywhere near Baltimore. In fact, I don't even visit anymore because I don't want to get shot. Why does any of this matter to me?
Jesse, first of all, I want to compliment you on your tweet immediately afterwards. As a person who has been a ship's captain, I can tell you were very incorrect in your assumptions, and I loved it. So it was pointing out the fallacy of a lot of people. And I'm glad that you owned it. A lot of people like to talk about these things and they don't really understand what they're talking about. So let's real quick get into the basics. First, the bridge is down and they're not going to clear it until they've obviously extracted all the human remains, and that's a tragedy. But for 30 days, it's going to take about 30 plus days. This is direct on the ground knowledge I have. 30 days to clear out the harbor in order to clear the shipping lanes. Once you've agreed and opened up the shipping lanes, it's going to take at least 2 years for the city of Baltimore to create an alternate hazardous materials route. Remember, the importance of the bridge was that you can't use the tunnels that go into the area to move any flammable materials. Let's get beyond the obvious commuter aspect of the bridge. So it's going to take 2 years to reestablish just a land route and 5 years to reestablish the bridge. Why does this matter? Well, what you're talking about is a port that rotates and oscillates in between being one of the top 15 to the top 10 ports in the entire United States. You're talking about over $60 billion in goods that went through there last year. And in particular, what you're talking about are goods that are not the sexy goods. These are not finished and completed items, although half of it does have to do with automobiles. It's your lumber, it's your fertilizers, it's your fuels. It's the things that make this country able to produce items and vice versa to ship out exports for other countries. This is a massive impact across the board. Not only will we see inflationary pressure from the cost of moving goods further to other ports, but you're also going to see that there's going to be longer delays and wait times because access to these ports are extremely important. It's part of what caused this tragedy was the fact that these ships are expected to turn around in under 48 hours. So as far as the average American's wallet, you may not see the impact today. You will see the impact start to slowly increase over the next couple of years. It sort of has a butterfly effect, and the ripples are just going to get larger as we wait.
Jason, can you clear up some things for people? Like, I really do. I had this question. I put it out publicly, and I had a bunch of guys who knew what they were talking about reach out and tell me. So I want you to tell everybody, why does it take so long to open up the port again? I understand, as you pointed out, we have human remains. I understand there's a big freaking bridge in the way that has to be moved so the ships can get through. I get that. But when they say months and months and months, that sounds crazy, but I understand there's a reasonable explanation. Why does it take so long to get the ships moving again?
Okay, so there's a couple of reasons for that. So primarily when we're talking about removing debris from that area, shipping lanes are very narrow, especially in particular this harbor. It's a very narrow shipping lane, which means that any obstructions or any future obstructions, so you don't just have the very narrow channel in the center that you need to worry about, but all of the debris on either side. This is a moving body of water. It's huge. The tidal motions are going to shift things around. So they're going to want to extract every aspect of that bridge and all of the material that's gone down, which is going to require BD rigs, that's going to require tugs, that's going to require, it's a massive undertaking. So every piece of that a bridge that could harm a vessel that would travel through that channel has to be removed in order to clear it for shipping lanes. And that's primarily why it takes long. It's under a huge body of water. You're talking about 120 feet deep, 130 feet deep down there. You're talking about massive pieces of steel that are going to have to be pulled apart. So this is it's just a huge undertaking. And again, it can't start until they've completed the recovery. And once that has started, it's a very delicate process, and you want to make sure that you clear an area. And once you clear an area, you don't know what's going to fall back in there. Again, these are moving water. It's a huge body of water.
Jason, I'm going to ask a really, really gruesome question, and I should probably apologize to everybody before I even ask it, but I'm curious because my sons asked me this weekend, you mentioned the human remains, they're still looking for them. Well, this is a little while ago. My sons asked me, where are the bodies? And I told them, son, they're probably never finding those people. They're shark food by now. Am I crazy? Is there a chance they recover those bodies?
I don't know enough about the specific place in which they were at the bridge. I do know that they were with a motor vehicle. You saw the bridge come down. Obviously, people have watched it in fast motion, but let's just hypothetically say that somebody's sitting on top of a van, enjoying their dinner. This horrible tragedy happens. When it collapses, I'm sorry, I'm going to look over it as I see it. So as you see, it falls in multiple pieces. So think about the San Francisco earthquake in 1989, where you have a segment of pavement that has collapsed on top of someone. It took them weeks to be able to pull all the human remains out of that tragedy. Now add the water element. Now this is buried underwater. So it's possible that the bodies could have drifted. And again, this is very gruesome, and I apologize to any of your viewers who are squeamish about this, but the bodies drift. The bodies could be trapped under something. And unfortunately, you are talking about, there's a lot of bottom feeders in that bay. Obviously, Maryland is known for its crabs, and that's a horribly disgusting thought. And so they will begin to obviously go after any remains that are down there. It's horrible for the families. It's gruesome for any first responders who are tasked with finding this. It's not going to be a pretty sight. And unfortunately, there most likely will be just a point where they will declare that they've done everything they can. And if they are, it's similar to digging in a site, doing any building that you might do. If you come across something midway, you stop again and then you reassess. As a matter of fact, this happened with the World Trade Center, as you're aware, when they were rebuilding that. So it's gruesome, but where are the bodies? If they weren't destroyed by the horrible, just volatile and violent nature of that attack, then most likely, again, they're going to have to be removed from a collapsed bridge. It's just a horrible thought.
It is. It's freaking awful, but that did explain it. All right, let's shift gears here. Jason, you are no longer in the United States military, and you're welcome to elaborate on the reasons why in a moment. But along those same lines, 38 chaplains are petitioning the Supreme Court. Why?
Well, here's the thing. Chaplains within units, as you're well aware, are not there just to lead religious services. They often are at the front of the family readiness group. That's usually the group that is assigned to, let me phrase that differently. That's generally spouses and other people who've gotten together to create an environment that can create a support sector for those units when they deploy, when they're in station, they're having issues, a new mother, so forth and so on. So the chaplains not only act as a liaison between the FRG and the units themselves, but they also play a huge role in understanding the mental capacity, the sort of where everybody's at in their heart and in their head. And as you're aware, downrange, that's hugely important. But right now, what they're being told is they're not allowed to talk about their faith when counseling soldiers. They're not allowed to use, and that's the very basis of where they draw their strength from. And being told that they can't do this, being told that there are being limits being put on this, defeats the whole purpose of the chaplain corps. And I'm sure you had your experiences, I've had my experiences, but these are very dedicated individuals in most instances who are very important to a unit's morale and cohesiveness, especially during kinetic activity or post-kinetic activity.